Cade Diehm has a multi-disciplinary background in information security, interface politics, and digital anthropology. Cade and his team study technology's macro influence on subculture, livelihood, identity, climate, and conflict. Cade has collaborated with PEN America, the University College London, the London College of Communication, Signal, Google, Mozilla, Bauhaus Earth, Webrecorder, Eyebeam, CO Berlin, Sonje Center, Open Archive, Superbloom Design, WYNG Foundation, the Pontifical Academy of Sciences, Furtherfield, Ink and Switch, the European Center for Constitutional and Human Rights, the International Institute for the Environment and Development, the European Commission, Protocol Labs, the Deutschland Bundestag Prototype Fund, the Center for Digital Resilience, Consumer Reports, the Algorithmic Transparency Institute, and many others. Prior to founding the New Design Congress, Cade spent 6 years leading design-focused digital security projects in Australia, the United States, Korea, Germany, Singapore, and the United Kingdom. He was an information security researcher and head of production at the Berlin-based nonprofit Tactical Tech. He contributed to early prototypes of the secure messaging app Signal and was chief design officer at SpiderOak, then a Snowden-approved no-knowledge cloud storage company. Benjamin Royer, as the research director of the New Design Congress, focuses on the political dimension of human-computer interactions and provides a research-driven backbone to our work. Benjamin combines more than 10 years of insider knowledge on the tech, design, and consulting industries, together with a sharp, critical framework borrowing from philosophy, anthropology, and sociology. His work has taken the form of collaborations with Ink and Switch, PEN America, Mozilla, Webrecorder, Protocol Labs, WYNG Foundation, and Signal. Benjamin is the author of The Imperial Sensorium, a post-colonial study of the cybernetic political economy. He is the co-author of Memory in Uncertainty, a landmark report on the discipline of web archiving, which has been featured at the International Internet Preservation Consortium 2023 and RESAW 2023 academic conferences on digital preservation. Benjamin has also translated Adam Greenfield's book, Radical Technologies, The Design of Everyday Life in French for Presence as editions. The New Design Congress, an independent research group confronting the gap between what is said to be happening and what is actually happening in digitized societies. Today's connected world exacerbates intolerable social, economic, political, and ecological issues without accountability. Interventions in the name of innovation, ethics, or justice have failed. We believe that, through a fundamental rethinking of technology as an accelerant rather than a cause of societal issues, another world is possible. By combining a civic academia research methodology with an intervention strategy modeled after adversarial information security practice, we produce accessible, participatory, and innovative work that cultivates accountability by taking responsible disclosure methods commonly found in offensive security and repurposing them for socio-technical and strategic contexts. Now, here is Cade and Ben.
I wanted to just quickly start by giving a bit of a slight, just setting the expectations of the discussion today. We're here before we have concrete findings because this project is quite large. We have some early findings as well as some novel problem statements that I think are really interesting and are ready to look at. And the idea here, whereas before the sort of the shoes that we have to fill are quite large, and the kind of work that's been presented here over the course of a year or the past couple of years has been very, very rigorously researched, things like that. This is in progress. So we're about, I would say, halfway through a multi-year body of work. And we're taking a breather from our research today to share what we've found so far, to raise awareness, because the participant, Matt described this before. Actually, I need to start my recording. Let me do that now as well. Oops. Okay. As Matt described, there's a participatory component to this, a qualitative research. It's looking at different disciplines and so forth. And so, yeah, today's discussion is going to be a little bit more in progress rather than the much more polished and finished work that other people tend to come here with today. So I wanted to start with that. And then before we dive into this, because we have a little bit of time, I wanted to give a little bit of a history as to who we are at New Design Congress. Allow Benjamin to introduce himself as well, and then we'll go from there. So to begin with, my name is Cade. I've been in this interesting, tense kind of space of being half a designer, so user interface design, things like that, but someone who was pulled very early out of the early smartphone app gold rush into digital security. One of the things that you probably, a fun story I can sort of talk about here is where I really cut my teeth was being involved in the first initial design development and launch of Signal. And I have this great story that I'm beginning to talk about. I have here screenshots of what Signal used to look like back in, I would say, November, December 2013 or early 2014, before it was finalized and published in the App Store. And here, it actually looks a little bit more like iOS 7, because that's the era. So it's all that sort of very thin typeface and stuff like that. But I wanted to point out just little things like back then, WhatsApp didn't exist. These sorts of things were like the internet messaging services were quite new. And we were experimenting with things like how could we turn off autocorrect? How could we ensure that people don't get sent malware over the device? This is way back before, I think Telegram was in its infancy. WhatsApp cost 99 cents, all of these sorts of things. And the funny little story that I have, which because I delete my tweets, I can't really show you anymore, but you're going to have to trust me on this, was that this version of Signal, which doesn't look anything like the first version of Signal that actually launched, was received really well. We got it into beta, into test flight and into the hands of people in the beta testing queue. And when I went to finish this work, I was overridden by Moxie Marlinspike, and a lot of my design decisions were reverted and turned into what there is today. And the fallout from that, I'm proud to say, was extremely great. Watching lots of people in the InfoSec scene, including people like DeGrug Q, these really people I looked up to, being like, what the hell has happened? What did you do to my Signal? Sweet, that felt really good. So as like a young, just fresh out of university kind of person, seeing that kind of level of involvement and passion in what I was doing, and knowing that some of my earliest ideas were kind of right around protecting users in very small ways was interesting. I'm just dwelling on that a little bit because I like that story. But since then, I've worked at a variety of spaces. I was in a C-level executive at SpiderOak after it was name dropped by Edward Snowden, back when SpiderOak was known as a secure Dropbox competitor. And then after leaving that organization, I moved to Germany, to Berlin, and I worked at Tactical Tech, a data privacy organization. I helped lead their information security research and their production side. So I was both advising people who came to us, whether it was the European Union Court of Human Rights, or whether it was journalists, things like that. I was helping advise different people in need, but then also producing and putting together a team that was able to produce top quality public engagements for this kind of for raising awareness around data privacy and data politics. Benjamin.
Yeah, my presentation is going to be a lot more mundane.
Sorry.
Because Cade was absorbed very quickly in the cybersecurity sphere. I joined really recently because of Cade. 3 years ago, I am trained as a UX UI designer as well. And at this time of the design industry where big consulting firms were starting to look into design systems and design methodologies to sell or to upsell their technical solutions. So your BCG, your McKinsey, were all starting to either acquire design studios, big and small, or using them as vendors. And so I intervened in these systems, designing the interfaces, but also the broader user experience and the logic of them, which often implied making a lot of workers redundant. So it sort of shattered my mind a little bit, got quite disillusioned, but met Cade on Twitter, of all places, and we started collaborating on interfaces, on cybersecurity research. Did more work for Signal. Was it last year?
Yeah, we came back. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so really sort of trying to, where Cade is more the technical cybersecurity guy, I'm trying to look into it more sociologically and anthropologically, and the intertwining of history and sociology in the hacking or the attacking of digital systems.
And the third person who's not here today is Roel Roskam-Abing, excuse me, who is a co-author on this particular piece of work and is currently studying a PhD in interaction design at Malmö University at the School of Arts and Communication. In this role, in this engagement with us, Roel is acting independently, not a part of the university, but Roel is also well known for, I'll just put this up now. Roel's notoriety is understanding the implications of digital systems in the environment. So you may have seen this website. This is Low Tech Magazine. Roel was on a team and led a process of creating a renewable energy website that has a number of optimizations associated with it to make it extremely resilient. So it runs on a tiny machine off a small solar panel, and it sits in Barcelona, and it serves hundreds of thousands of requests a day because the website itself is particularly interesting, and it uses a number of design decisions to accommodate the low-fi, if you like, or low-tech internet implementation. So Roel has been involved in this work as well. So with that, I want to quickly introduce who we are and what's going on here today. So when I joined Tactical Tech, I was disillusioned by the fact that no matter how, as we were getting more and more secure, and from what I'd seen at the beginning of my career working at places like Deloitte Digital and these places that did early smartphone apps that were connected to, the first wave of, large corporates experimenting with smartphone apps, I was concerned by the number of unintended consequences as a result of that. I mean, this here is a screenshot. I published an article when I joined Tactical Tech, which is mirrored at the New Design Congress website, called On Weaponized Design, which just defines a term, weaponized design, that describes when systems and interfaces harm users whilst performing exactly as they're supposed to. And I just recently reread this. I hadn't read this for a while. I came back and looked over it very recently, and there's a number of examples here that in hindsight now feel really quite mundane compared to when I wrote this. This here is a screenshot. It's one of the examples, the exhibits that I use. It's the Facebook year in review, and it's got 4 screenshots. On the top left is a celebration of a portrait of a young girl. The top right is what looks like a beach with an object on it, another celebration. Bottom left is an old-looking dog with a celebration, and on the bottom right is a building on fire with celebrations. And what this term weaponized design kind of talks about is that at the end of the day, there are all of these ways in which no matter what we did, whether it was design ethics or kind of these interventions to make things feel like they had more justice associated with them when they were being designed and implemented, that things were just happening that were harming people in really avoidable ways. So in the top left, this is the screenshot of the year in review with the small girl. This is a very famous web developer, a CSS developer, and his daughter had died of cancer that year. And this is the last photo that he took of her, like for the announcement of that. Because it was the most engaged with on his Facebook profile, it was presented as a celebration. On the right-hand side, top right, is someone's ashes before they were being scattered at their resting place. The bottom left is a beloved family dog being euthanized, the last photo. And of course, the bottom right, which is the most egregious, is someone's house burning down. And at the time, Eric Mayer, who is the father of the young girl, wrote, "Algorithms are essentially thoughtless. They model certain decision flows, but once you run them, no more thought occurs. To call a person thoughtless is usually considered a slight or an outright insult. And yet we unleash so many literally thoughtless systems and processes on our users, on our lives, on ourselves. In creating this year in review, there was not enough thought given to cases like mine or anyone who had had a bad year. The design is for the ideal user, the happy, upbeat, good life user, and it doesn't take any other use cases into account." And this, of course, was written in 2014, around the time again that I was, working on Signal, and I believed that encryption would solve these issues. But as we can all tell, the discussion that Matt and Benjamin and I had during the sound check that everybody's been having, we've reached a point now where actually these are not even the worst of it, not even close. Like, things have gotten worse and worse. And so when I founded New Design Congress, part of the understanding of this was that we were going to be an independent research group that confronts the gap between what is said to be happening, what is actually happening in digitized societies. And what that means is essentially that we're a socio-political red teaming organization, a socio-technical red teaming organization. So much the same way as you have offensive or adversarial digital security, who might do penetration testing, on-site testing, these sorts of things. New Design Congress does the same sort of thing, but conceptually. So we even follow these processes of responsible disclosure. Everything that exists within the context of like a digital security organization, we have repurposed this in a sort of socio-technical way. And what that gives us, again, is like a deep research, responsible disclosure, and open access publication pipeline. And ultimately, what that allows us to do is work very closely with different people in different parts of infrastructure, and do so with the confidence that they're going to be very transparent and lay a lot of things out for us, with the confidence that what they get back is something that's open access and beneficial to the wider community, but also that we respect the kind of ethics that are associated with the traditional idea of responsible disclosure. And we do all of this through the lens of, this is a future that we will not accept another world is possible. So moving from one of the biggest areas of weaponized design, I think everybody here would agree, is digital identity. Digital identity itself, through social engineering attack especially, but not only through social engineering attack, is a system that behaves in many cases exactly how it's supposed to. You get a profile and everything behaves normally. You see a user's username and you see their profile photo and their activity online, and you think, yes, I think I know who this person is, and it turns out you're being catfished. In that time, the identity itself is behaving completely normally, but it is these little these exploitations of your vulnerabilities and of your weaknesses as a person who's able to do pattern recognition, have biases, things like that. These are the things that get you historically. And now we're reaching a point where with deepfakes and other advanced adversarial technologies and methodologies, that there's almost no hope in some circumstances. If you receive a phone call from someone who convincingly sounds like a loved one in trouble, then you are very likely, and in some cases have no hope of being able to, without doing preparation in advance, defend yourself against a social engineering attack. And so for the last couple of years, New Design Congress, as one of the core research projects, has been working on this concept of digital identity from the lens of, what would it mean if all forms of digital identity are fundamentally vulnerable? What does that, how does that, what if we can't solve for digital identity in its current form? And what if we then need to do something else? And so today what we'd like to do is present to you some of the ways in which we've developed the problem statements around this, and then some of the early findings, and then open it up for discussion and critique to see what people think and how they're reacting and where we might need to go within the group here in order to continue this research. So I'm going to take a moment, have a drink of water, and so we'll start with the three problem statements. The first one being, digital identity creates brittle societies. What this means is that digital identity represents people, institutions, devices, and other entities. Our working definition is this idea that a digital identity is interoperable in a conceptual way, regardless of whether it represents a person or whether it represents a device on a network. But common to all forms of digital identity are these 6 properties: serialization, custodianship, presentation, authentication, authorization, and assetization. And to give you an idea of what that means, serialization is when part of an individual is read and converted into a digital form by software or hardware sensory apparatuses and defined at the discretion of the systems designer. So this is a process of creating the identity. Custodianship is when the serialized self from which the identity is derived is stored and maintained in some form, be it via software automation or manual means like local storage or in a secure enclave, etc. Presentation is where the serialized data that becomes the identity is reassembled and made legible to machines or humans through an interface of some kind. This is everything from namespace lookup to a user profile and an interface. Authentication is when the digital identity becomes a central mechanism in which an individual invokes a form of cryptography and or relational trust to gain access to digital or real-world resources, services, or opportunities, or is granted movement in a physical place. And this is everything from key exchange to the tapping of a card and employee lanyard in order to gain access to a building. Authorization is when the authentication and presentation layers of a digital identity together act as a vessel for an individual that allows gatekeepers to give and maintain access to a system or resource. So for example, in a traditional model, this would be something like setting permissions, user permissions, or disk permissions for different users. Assetization is where the digital identity is employed as the support for wider financial speculations or other commercial ventures. And so this covers, for example, Web3 tokenizations of digital identity. Each of the 6 properties, and we have this in the chapter that's available on New Design Congress right now as the first chapter of the problem statements, each of these 6 properties of a digital identity has these systemic flaws. They're all vulnerable in various ways, and they're all conceptually, in a technical sense, inconsistent. And I won't get into these because that's an entire discussion. But if you go and have a look, this is the general problem statement. But ultimately, because identity is central to all networks, the flaws in the 6 properties are points of compromise for any of those networks. So this network, if we think, as a gentle general rule, a system is only as secure as its least secure property. We argue in the first problem statement that identity is central and it's vulnerable across 6 of the 6 core properties.
So
Benjamin.
should add that when we talk about digital identity, here we're trying to make sense of a very broad and confused and self-contradicting definition of digital identities and conceptualization. So just to keep in mind that doesn't help the conversation any, but we have to make some pretty broad statements. Okay,
and
by
this
the
is
way,
this is where yours comes in, right? The second problem statement is paralyzed by misunderstanding and misuse.
Yeah, so that's one of the bigger problem that we've had in doing this research, is that every institution has a different definition of digital identity. So historically, all statement at NDC is that it harkens from a conceptual space that we deem Cartesian, which is a sort of I think therefore I am classic statement, but applied to digital identity is very much I authenticate, therefore I am. So think about the early Facebook sort of understanding where you fill up your profile and it is who you are. Right now, this is starting to break apart quite quickly for a variety of reasons, but it's sort of this sort of ferment of digital identity. Now, as we said earlier, the issue that is happening right now is that suddenly you have a lot of different platforms that offer this ability to claim, I authenticate, therefore I am. So you have your Instagram, you have your Facebook, you have your TikTok, all these platforms and more, because you have those public platforms. For example, in South Korea, you interact with the government through Naver. It's not Naver. It's Kakao Talk. Cade, you'll correct me. Where you have an identity. Yeah, you have an identity for the states for the government of South Korea that is mediated by Kakao Talk and its services, right? So when combined with external forces, all this situation engenders a lot of different threats, a lot of different risks, and a lot of problems that people or institutions are not capable of properly assessing or even visualizing and understanding. And because digital identity is so connected to identity, obviously, because it intertwines with our relationship towards the state, how we are recognized by the state, how we are recognized by a host of institutions, public and private, it just turns the whole situation extremely, extremely dangerous.
And then the third one, which is primarily driven by rules arguments here, is that digital identity is amorphous and does not conform to conceptual models. So here we're talking about applying, and I had these notes and I can't find it. There's a particular, this note's going live very soon, so you'll be able to dive into this. But there's a particular set of well-known definitions, models of digital identity. Siloed digital identity, which is where the user creates an account, and the account, the identity provider who provides the identity, and the service provider who's obviously, you know, the target of the login or the account creation. That person self-manages, the user self-manages the siloed identity, and the identity provider and the service provider are the same person or the same institution. So it's a siloed identity. A centralized identity is when the identity provider is separated from the service provider. And so this is like your traditional single sign-on, you know, so these concepts of like sign-on with Google, like OpenID, SAML, like these sorts of all of the kind of protocols that have emerged around abstracting an identity primitive from different service providers and platforms. A federated identity model is one in which there is no single identity provider for an interoperable identity system. So, of course, these are, as I say this again, these can be things like protocols, again, like a single sign-on, the underlying protocols associated with them that become federated because the circle of trust between them is derived not necessarily through enforcement like a blockchain or something like that, but usually through consensus, legislation, interoperability, and so forth. And then the fourth one is user-centric, in which the identity provider is actually the user themselves. Either they hold the identity in their custody, or it's derived, the identity is derived from them. So these are persona-based identities. These can be derived through surveillance, so deriving identities based on someone's browser history, and then sort of determining what a person is and holding some kind of idea of what that person is through that observation and so forth. And what's tricky, kind of obvious as I start to talk about this, is that each of the four models, they describe a power relation and interoperability or opportunity of centralization or power focus between users, identity providers, and service providers. But between all of them, as soon as you start looking at them, depending on when you observe these different forms of identity, when you start looking at them, you start to realize that they don't fit neatly into these models. So like Google is an example in these definitions of a centralized identity model, but it's also a siloed identity model inside the Google system, in sort of a conceptual sense. But it also is reliant on federated code, right? It's sort of built upon an existing set of interoperable tools and open source projects in many cases. So depending on where you look at a different form of digital identity, they shapeshift depending on how you look at them and what you choose to evaluate them against. And so because of this, digital identity cannot be definitively described because the politics and configuration of power and the flows of where the information travels and how the identity is derived are multidimensional and multidirectional. So we have these three problem statements where no matter how you look at it, whether it's as an observer, as somebody in the actual digital identity space, or from a cybernetic sort of technical conceptual first principle space, digital identity has these flaws and is amorphous more generally. And so it's from this particular set of problem statements that we believe that digital identity is vulnerable and that we need to come up with something new. So over the course of the last couple of years, but really in the last year and a half, we've been doing a series of qualitative research interviews with various experts from a variety of disciplines. And we also have started work on a series of case studies of different identity systems, some of them emergent, some of them in place today as successes or failures, and some of them that are historical analyses of digital identities that have become before. And what we wanted to do in this particular part is we have a wide body of findings that we're developing as we speak. But as of right now, I want to take a step back and look at the early leads that we've started to feel really confident about in this work over the last couple of months. The first one is, and Benjamin, please jump in because I can't remember which ones you want to do. So please jump in when you can.
I'll do this one. I'll do this one.
Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So as we implied, digital identity is ambiguous, and attempts to define it are contested, and they should be. And even in our analysis, what Cade just talked about with our approach with spheres instead of just modes or frameworks. So the issue we have now with this ambiguity, I should say, is that they cover a lot of different systems. So we have health, we have civil society, so elections, insurance, policing. And one of the first things that arise, obviously, are privacy implications, especially as they relate to biometrics. Now, privacy implications, interestingly enough, are acknowledged by the field, by a lot of different actors, but our issue with it is that they often discuss privacy as an abstract concept. So it's really easy to just say we think about privacy, and maybe flow into a technical solution, and for example, self-sovereignty or zero knowledge proof to assuage these concerns that, after the 2010s, we now understand that privacy is a big issue in those platforms, but they never really go at the roots of the problem. So one of those problems is, for example, what are biometrics fundamentally? We asked the question whether wellness and mental health readings from apps, are they biometrics? Could they be used as biometrics? And we never had a very clear answer so far, which raised a lot of different questions. Can wellness and mental health readings be used as biometrics to identify you? Maybe, maybe not. Depends. It's very vibe-based answer that you get. There's another obviously difference in biometrics where you have one-to-one comparison on your templates, your biometrics, or one-to-many comparison where there are a lot of statistical analysis to differentiate the sample to check and the database. They imply a lot of different issues and threats. Then the next one is what we call actual biometrics and biometric generated key pairs. That's not the same set of issues and threats as well. In one case, you will have the question of where do the fingerprints and the images of irises are, so which database, who owns the database, and it creates a lot of very funny interactions with a lot of different institutions or private actors as to where they host their data, biometric data. But a lot of institutions sidestep this question by using biometric generated key pairs. So you don't actually store the images of the fingerprints of the iris, but you generate a hash that is then, relatively more secure. But it still raises a lot of concerns because, how is it generated? Can you reverse engineer the algorithm that generated the key pair? Is it still sensible to social engineering attack? Because at this point you separate yourself from the biometrics. So a lot of the uniqueness of biometrics, like one biometric, one human, is sort of muddied a little bit. So all this ambiguity is in line with shifting, what we call the shifting conceptual definition within cybernetics, where there are not to give a whole talk about cybernetics, but the observation of a system and the observation of the system just creates this shifting rhetorical lines that are very difficult to follow and in the end create threats that are very difficult to isolate.
Yeah, and they're difficult to isolate as well because, at the core of it, depending on who we speak to, we get a different definition. So even when you talk about biometrics, actual versus biometric generated key pairs, people talk past each other all the time because one person's talking about the former, one person's talking about the latter. And that's important because as we have these shifting definitions and these uncertainties, there's also, as we've collectively described here over the course of the last couple of months at CSI, there is a race to secure networks because they're being weaponized at a greater and greater rate. Digital identity itself and social engineering attacks account for billions and billions of dollars worth of attacks. And so, just to give you an example, over a 5-year period from 2017, US companies paid an estimated $1.6 billion per year due to social engineering attacks. And that's a conservative number. But at the same time, the probability of success for a social engineering attack jumped 15% in the same period. So that means that by the end of 2017, the success rate of social engineering attacks in some circumstances was 3 out of 4. And so, of course, there is a race to secure networks. But what that has done is started to make identity immutable. And we spoke to people and we've seen literature and example events in the real world, like from elections to financial fraud to state violence. Identity continues a trend toward immutability. Once you have these identity systems that have multi-factor, that have double checks that can't be changed, those are then uncorrectable. And as a result of that, we have these situations where seemingly very secure and very stable identity systems are unable to be corrected and thusly become less and less accurate as to what they represent. And as I said, the primary drivers here of this immutability is biometrics, governance, and financialization. So defending against fraud, defending the stability of the government, and the replacement of other forms of authentication through biometrics. And what that leads to in concrete terms are things like, we've got a whole chapter in this report about how consumer financial regulation designed to protect consumers when they're scammed out of money. The introduction of biometrics into consumer banking apps has allowed different financial institutions to claim that the transactions are legitimate, even though they may fall outside of the intended scope of the law of these consumer protections. This is happening internationally. And so we have stories of people in the UK taking their bank to court after being knocked unconscious, having their face ID scanned, and having their account drained on CCTV, and that being considered a legitimate transfer until it hits the press, and then a crisis team refunds the customer from the bank. And more importantly, and this is from some anecdotes from some of the research, face pairing can't be undone. And what we've found is that there's more and harder efforts to define what appearance means and what is valid appearance and what is valid in terms of biological presentation in all forms, including things like gender, but also disability, like disfigurement or injury, these sorts of things. And even as those systems are rolled out at scale, we've heard stories and seen examples where people with the degree of whose biometrics exist within a degree of error, they start to fuse. So two people's fingerprints start to fuse within the digital identity, and suddenly you can't undo that anymore. So you have these circumstances where people can unlock a face phone, for example, or with a fingerprint, and over time the system trains two fingers as though they're one from two different people, and that can't be unpaired. It's either has to be deleted, or if it's possible to delete it, that's how it happens. Otherwise you're just stuck with that identity marker. Do you want to do this one, Benjamin, or should I?
No, go for it.
Okay, so this one and the next one are two contradictory terms that happen to be true at the same time, or claims. One, of course, is that digital identity is identity. We use digital identity in financial, commercial, transactional trust systems, and we deploy them at scale. And they're used to track everything from diaspora elections all the way through to welfare, etc. But they're also incomplete in lots of ways, and so you're asked sort of like to produce a digital identity, especially sovereign identity, that allows you to present yourself as you truly are. But in all of these cases that we've looked at, there are huge examples of entire classes or demographics of people that this one identity, one device, one user doesn't account for. So you have, for example, entire underground, if you like, or undocumented marketplaces in which people experiencing homelessness in urban centers will trade devices through for various sort of trade. Maybe they'll have three people using one phone so that they're trying to get back on their feet. They share a phone number and they are all looking for a job, and so they're looking for callbacks for those jobs, or they might trade it for another thing that they need immediately, like I don't know, like cigarettes or something, or just anything basically. The idea here is that, like, even in the context of financial hardship, in a country like the United States, which prioritizes heavily one individualism, like one device, one identity, one user, even in those contexts, there are huge populations within that fails. And so we've designed a set of authentication systems and that are based around digital identity being identity, but specifically this kind of single point of identity. And then the flip side of this.
I can do that if you want. Yeah, this one is a bit of a jest, because in the literature that we've consulted as part of this research is we have the claim that digital identity is identity, but also, actually digital identity is not identity. Don't worry about it. So this is quite jarring, because you have a quote from a paper at the top here. Digital identity is an identifier, actually. It's not a digital identity. Well, it's not an identity. It's an identifier called verifiable identity, which has identifiers as attributes. So that kind of hints at the limits of what we were trying to do at the beginning, which is defining digital identity or defining as best as we could, because you hit your heads against the wall of rhetoric, and that's what leads to this interpretative and operational flexibility of identity and of digital identity. Right? You can dodge scrutiny, legal, regulations, or market-based, whatever they are. And you can skirt all of that by claiming your identity, by claiming that you are actually furthering the claims of social minorities, trying to help them live according to what they want to be seen as. But also you can say, actually, it's the pure digital system that has nothing to do with your identity. And so in a lot of the system that we analyze as well, there are efforts to compartmentalize identity as a defensive tool for separating the self from digital identity. So you have your personas, which are your multi-identity. So you can have you can federate your own identities or your own accounts. under the banner of your identity. You can self-disclose whatever identities you want, but this has limits. First, as to the number of people who can actually play that game, and as it leads to private entities helping you manage these kind of personas.
And finally, I think, is this the final one? It is the final one.
Yeah.
So there's actually like 12 now, but these are the first 5. We still find today that no identity system, current or proposed, defeats social engineering, which essentially is that the performative power of identity, even a partial one with a limited set of attributes, counterintuitively opens the door to new and more powerful Sybil attacks. And this is specifically looking at things like Web3 identities, where you have markers that are specifically tied to wallets, and the identities themselves are value-based or financialized even without any additional markers associated with them about a person. So even when you strip these back, but you still have some form of stake against them, whether it's biometric encryption or value-based, they're still vulnerable in various ways to social engineering attacks. And what we have here is a growing thing. Again, I mean, this bit is I think common knowledge amongst this audience. These are now becoming black market commodities. Dumped Uber accounts for private driving, like you commandeer a hacked Uber account and you can travel anywhere once, relatively anonymously, these sorts of things. And the point here is that the different ways in which identity is dumped online, accessed illegitimately, and then seized means that, and the kind of combination of immutability and financialization means that success is unbelievably lucrative, and we're beginning to have a runaway kind of arms race here, which again is something I think this room knows about.
As part of this research, actually, we were in the room when that kind of attack happened, this black market attack. Yeah. We
were speaking with some people as part of our participatory interviews, and some of the things that they were working alongside of suffered an attack while we were in the interview. So like it's an everyday thing at this point. So what comes next? Here's a little timeline. I won't read this all out because I'm keen to get onto the discussion here, but we have this report is massive. We've got about halfway through it right now. The interviews are still ongoing. And so over the course of the next 12 months, we will be drip feeding on our website different parts of it, with the eventual goal of having a living section on the New Design Congress website of repository of finding, data sets, etc., and different case studies. And so right now we have 6 planned. We're working on 2 at the moment. One is with the European Union digital identity credentials effort, and the other is with a Web3 identity provider. But we also are looking to do a debrief at the end of the year around what it means, what our findings mean for the calls to have new forms of digital identity that we expect will happen in the wake of the probably traumatic elections in the United States and the disinfo and other trickery that will happen around that time. And then hopefully in 2025, we're looking at engaging with partners and doing research into social engineering resistant identity prototypes. You can follow the progress. Matt just put that on the call message. Yeah, great. So you can join as a free member or support our work if you'd like, to get early access to everything and help this work stay independent. But at the very minimum, becoming a free member of New Design Congress gives you regular updates to everything and things like that. But you can come and do an interview with us if you haven't done one already, or if you know someone who might be interested in this work, who has a perspective that could help inform this work further. And then these are the 3 first publications. Again, we'll drop all of the notes in a copy of these slides online so you can take a look at them. And with that, I'd like to open it up for discussions. And thank you once again for being here. Thank you, Matthew, for inviting us. This has been really fun. And over to the people here. Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation to the Cognitive Security Institute. You may learn more about topics in cognitive security by visiting us at cognitivesecurity.institute.